Hi, everyone, and welcome to season 6 and episode 2 of Behind Your Eyes. The wonderful Cha is my guest. So, Cha, if you would like to introduce yourself to everyone.
Hi, my name is Cha Higginson, and I'm the owner and founder of the Soul Strategist. What I do is basically get people out of their own way and figure out who they really are. And as we all know, we tend to kind of go through life and hold up so many different masks of who we're expected to be or who we think we are. And I help people really shed all of those away and be really super comfortable with who they really are. Because I believe that what we're supposed to be doing is showing up as our true selves. And that, we all need a bit of support in figuring out who we are and knowing that we're fully acceptable and beautiful just the way we are. So that's what I help people with.
And well, I always start with the same question, which is a sincere, how are you doing?
You know what? I love that question. And today I'm doing really good.
Oh, that's good.
I know that it's when people ask me, I've actually had a few people recently tell me that it's really interesting that I don't just answer like, oh, I'm fine. I always kind of like pause and actually like tune in and go like, how am I actually? And I give them a really honest and truthful response, which I think in this day and age is refreshing, but it's also like we need to just be honest about how we're doing. We don't have to always be okay. And sometimes I'm great and sometimes I'm not. But today I'm really good and I'm really happy to be here with you. So
thank you. And I read on your website that you were born in Africa, and as a child you've traveled a lot and lived in several European countries. So I would love to hear about how your childhood, what it was like, really.
Well, you know what? If someone asked me about 15 years ago about my childhood, I would have told them a very different story to what I say today.
Yeah.
I think my original story was very much tainted with what my parents had told me. So it was kind of like, yeah, it was amazing. We traveled the world and we explored all these different places. And I spent the first few childhood years like seeing dolphins and whales and living on a boat, and it was amazing. But to be honest, when I grew up and I started my own journey of healing, I realized that I didn't know what it felt like to belong anywhere. I didn't have any family around me, and I felt like I didn't belong, and I didn't know where I fit in, and I didn't feel like I fit in anywhere. And people around me didn't understand me. They always thought that I was always, the new kid in school, and I was always a little bit different, and I had a weird name, and I came from a country that people didn't know about. And so I think now I'm very grateful for all of my experiences. But when I was growing up, it wasn't all that fabulous, and it wasn't all that, beautiful and shiny and as exotic as people think it is.
Yeah.
Because we all kind of just want to fit in. We just want to be like everybody else. And
yeah, especially as kids, you want to, like you said, you want to fit in and you want to feel like you have a steady home base.
Yeah. So I didn't have any of that. And I think in hindsight, it made me a lot more compassionate and a lot more understanding of other people who feel like, I mean, you know what, to be honest, what I've discovered is that we all feel like we don't fit. We all feel like misfits. We all feel like we don't belong. Like no matter what it looks like from the outside, on the inside, we all feel like that. But I genuinely know what that feels like. So, in hindsight, it's enabled me to be a lot more empathic and compassionate and understanding. But I think that's always the case of people who are in our industry. Like we do it because we know how it feels to be on the other side. So we want to help people get where we are now and know that life can be amazing, but it's also, we appreciate it when we've been we've had that, you know.
Yeah,
All those
we've
different forms of,
experienced the other side as well.
yeah.
And you mentioned, of course, we all want to fit in, but you also mentioned on your website a quote that says, "A trauma we all share is caused by trying to fit in when we were born to stand out." I would love to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, what it took me a really long time to understand is that I'm a shaman, and you don't become a shaman by just like going to shaman school. Like, it's something that you are to the core, and you kind of, in my experience, I tried to avoid it for a very long time, and kind of life slapped me around until I got into where I was meant to be. But I remember very clearly having different moments in my life where I felt like, whether you want to call it the universe or God or your own soul or your intuition, or, I believe that those are lots of different words to talk about the same thing ultimately. But I felt like I was guided to have these moments where I felt like my soul was telling me, pay attention, this one thing that's happening, or this one thing that you're seeing, or this one thing that you're hearing, it's important. And it felt like the whole world stopped around me, and all of my focus was going on this one particular thing. And that particular quote was when I was about 19, and I was living in France at the time, and I went on a trip to London, and I was in a pub, and it was, London pubs always like, there's so much character in them, right? And on the wall of this pub, there were all of these coasters, and one of them had a picture of a giraffe, and it was in a field full of zebras or cows or something, like, I think it was cows, because it kind of like, the giraffe and the cows had similar kind of markings, but not the same. And this giraffe was standing there and going like, stop trying to fit in when you were born to stand out. And to this day, like, I remember how I saw it and I read it and I felt it in my body, like, and I felt it so deep. And it was a kind of an experience that I'd never had before. And it felt so meaningful, but I didn't quite get why it was meaningful and what it was trying to say. And that particular memory kept on coming back at different times in my life until suddenly I got it. And I was like, oh, that's what
that's what it was trying to say.
And this I actually joked, it was many years later, I was joking to a friend that I was seeing giraffes everywhere, and I was like, I think, and she was like, giraffes must be your spirit animal. And I went online, as you do, like, kind of like, giraffe spirit animal, what does that mean? And what was really interesting about that situation is I looked at it, and what I saw was this explanation that, the giraffe kind of sees the world from above. And so where everyone's kind of like looking around and seeing life as it is, and what, the reflections that they have all around them, the giraffe gets that higher perspective.
Right.
And that made a lot of sense to me at the time. But what I found really, really interesting, and something that I often quote to my clients, is that, when you Google something, you might find an explanation that is intended for you, but someone else might Google the exact same thing, but they will find the explanation that is relevant to them.
Right.
And I was telling the exact story to a friend of mine, and she took her phone out and was like, oh, I'm going to Google what it is, before I had a chance to finish my story. And she came up with an explanation of what the giraffe as a spirit animal meant, but it was relevant to her. And it was so interesting. At the time, I remember going, I'm not going to tell her, because that's her, like, she needed that.
Exactly.
It was really interesting how we, everyone's got their own version of that, and we can, I think the whole journey of life is to figure out what life is trying to teach us specifically, rather than what it's teaching everybody else.
And
anyway, that was a really, really long story to explain that particular quote.
No, I love it. Well, it's like you said, we pick up those messages that were meant for us because they move us in a way, or they strike us in a way that, when someone's next to you seeing the same message, it might not mean the same to them, and or move them or create an emotion affects them, because it's meant for you and not for them.
Yeah.
So that's, I always loved it, because I love communicating with my spirit guides and asking for signs. And I could tell somebody, I talk to my mom about this a lot, and of course I say, oh, I saw my sign again, but it's my sign and not hers. So it strikes differently, but I know she gets my excitement, and I'm happy that I get to share with that. But it's always interesting to see that when you get so moved by a sign and you share it with someone else, and someone else is like, why would that be a sign? Isn't that something normal to see? Or like no, I know it's for me. So yeah, it's always fascinating to see how one message can impact you and doesn't impact someone else, even in the slightest.
No, because it's meant for you.
Exactly, yeah. And that's definitely a lesson I had to learn, because I was always so excited about that communication, I would call it, for my spirit guides. And when someone else wouldn't understand it, I would get a bit frustrated. Like, but it matters so much to me, and I was hoping they would share that with me. And now I know, like, okay, no, it's not. I mean, I'm allowed to share it with them, but they don't have to share that emotion with me, or that, because it's so valuable to me. They don't have to see the value in it for me to be valuable.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in itself is such a beautiful lesson of life, right? Mm-hmm. That it doesn't matter what it means to somebody else. Like, if you find value in it, if you find meaning in it, that's all that counts. It's about your experience.
Exactly. Yeah. And you explained on your website that motherhood was very hard for you. And can you explain how that affected you, and maybe even mentally as well?
Well, it affected me, I think mentally is probably the way that in the Western culture we've realized that things affect us. Mm-hmm. But it affected every aspect of me. To be completely honest, if I hadn't accidentally fallen pregnant, I'm not sure I would have had kids in like my I was 30 when I fell pregnant with my son. And what had happened is I was in a relationship with my now husband. We'd been together for a while. We had a house, we had a dog, like we were committed to one another. But when we talked about kids, I would be like, yeah, I've got other things to do. Like, I've got a career, I love my job, like whatever. Don't really like children. They're messy and they're noisy, and, don't have time for that.
Right.
And then the night we got engaged, we accidentally made a baby. And so my son kind of just decided, well, I'm ready. Mm-hmm. You committed to him, so let's do this. Yeah. And my human wasn't really ready for it. And I think for a lot of women, motherhood is that time where we change drastically, like everything. Like, we lose our career, our body suddenly doesn't belong to us anymore. It's, it changes in so many ways, and we lose everything that we believe ourselves to be. And for me, that was excruciating, because I lost my independence. I lost my career, which I really loved. I lost my intellectual abilities. Like, I considered myself to be a pretty smart person, but I couldn't think straight. I couldn't string a sentence together. I was so tired. Mm-hmm. And I just kind of felt like, how in Western culture or in so many cultures around the world, we tend to associate what we do as a job with our purpose. Right. So when we lose that career, or that we have to take that time off or go on maternity leave, we kind of feel like we've lost our purpose. Mm-hmm. And the purpose of just being a mum, I know it's a full-time job, and I know it's possibly one of the most meaningful things in the world. But for me at the time, I was like, I'm more than this. I felt like I was just feeding this tiny human and a complete slave to this baby. And even though I adored my child, like there's no question about that, I didn't know where or who I was in that whole experience. And it was really excruciating. And I was very good at masking my emotions and just getting through it and pretending that everything was fine, and I was really strong, and I could, I could kind of do all the things and keep the house clean and bake cookies, and then be like, hey, yeah, great, I'm acing this whole motherhood thing, but on the inside, dying.
Yeah, I
And
think a lot of mothers struggles with that.
yeah. But what I understand in hindsight is that basically that whole experience was breaking away everything that I believed myself to be and giving me the opportunity to kind of look deeper. And that it's kind of, I totally won't take credit for this quote, but it's one of the most beautiful things I've ever heard. It's that adversity is a gift wrapped in sandpaper. And that's really what motherhood felt like to me. It's like, it is that gift, but like, oh, it's gnarly. You open it up and you're like, your hands are bleeding. And you don't realize that it's a gift at the time.
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, that was motherhood to me. And I can hands down say that my kids were the most beautiful gift that life could have given me, because it made my whole life blow up from the inside. And then I had the opportunity to recreate it and to do it on my own terms and to figure out what was actually important to me. And and it led me to become who I was meant to be and to do the work that I was always meant to do, and to understand so many aspects of why we are the way we are. And and again, like, you know, become really compassionate towards other people who are going through, you know, whether it's, you know, for some people it's motherhood, for some people it's, you know, another experience of life. It could be losing your job or losing someone that you love, or a breakup or a divorce, or whatever it is that shakes your life up and makes you question everything. I know what that feels like. So I think it kind of armors us with a lot more understanding and compassion to be able to do this kind of work.
It's almost like you had to completely fall apart to be able to rebuild yourself again in the way you were meant to.
Yeah.
And you said after that period, you, instead of healing first, you started a business because you attach your self-worth to the success of your business. So how did you go from that then to your healing journey?
Well, my business was initially, it was a creative business, and I'm an incredibly creative person, and everything that I do comes back to art always. Like, that's how it's how I make sense of the world. It's how I connect to myself. So it was always, even though it was a business, it was creative, and it enabled me to get into that flow state, which is really where I find myself and where I find my magic and where I make sense of everything. And so ultimately I was finding a space where I could just be with myself and be in flow. And that's when I started to, like, I'm a channel. So that's when I started to channel, but I didn't understand what I was doing at first. I was still in that phase of kind of just finding those pieces of myself and trying to understand myself. But what I uncovered is that through the creative process, I would find a sense of peace and connection to myself and connection to oneness. And that became somewhat addictive in a way. So I was avoiding doing all the healing by just diving into my creativity and making money from that. And it became, you know, very much an obsession to kind of like get all the aspects right. And, you know, that perfectionistic part of us that's like, if I can get this thing, one thing perfect, then I'm going to be okay, which is a complete lie. But no, we try to do it. And so through that business and building that business, I completely burnt out, because I put everything that I possibly, every single hour and any little ounce of energy that was outside of keeping my children alive, and I wasn't even caring for myself. Like, I was really just, you know, surviving. I put all of that energy into making this business work, and yeah, I completely burnt out. So then I actually got to a point where it was when my second child was a newborn. A friend of mine took her own life. And I remember that stage feeling like our children were very similar in age. Our sons were only a few months apart. And I remember thinking, for a mother to do that, she'd gotten to a stage in her life where the pain of living was superior to the pain of leaving her child behind.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling like that, like I can't get to that point. Like I need to, whatever is inside of me that I'm not dealing with, that I'm not, because, you know, by this time, when we experience burnout, we have moments of like, I remember having moments of like randomly bursting into tears and then trying to like pull myself together within 5 minutes to pretend that I was okay to face like my closest friends or my husband. And I kind of like, I knew I was like, I'm not okay. Like, I'm very not okay, but I don't know what to do about it. I had no idea. But when that happened and I kind of was looking at like her life and her little son that she left behind and her husband and this life that everyone told me at the time, like, why? What happened? Like, she had everything. And I remember thinking, well, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't matter what you have on the outside. On the inside, she was not okay. And I was like, but I'm not okay either. And I need to sort this out very quickly because like, you know, I've got 2 children and a wonderful husband and a seemingly wonderful life. So whatever's going on, it's not the outside. It's very clearly what's inside.
Yeah.
So that kind of gave me that motivation to get results and to get them fast and to do whatever it took to deal with my shit. Like, because ultimately that's what it is. It's like, it's, you know, when we stop blaming the outside world and we stop making it about anybody else, and we just go like, no, I need to do this. And I felt really like I'd backed myself into a corner and that I had no other option than to like walk into the fire.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, okay, I've got nowhere else to go, so let's fucking do this.
Yeah.
And it's not pretty, you know, anyone who gets to that point, it's not pretty, but it's so worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah, especially when you reach that point, like you said, when you just have no other way to go, you are forced to heal.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember being like that when I had to face my terrible anxiety. And I was already sitting at home for at least 6 months without leaving even my room practically. And suddenly it just overwhelmed me, and I was crying and hitting my walls because the walls, I would be mad at the walls, which was kind of crazy, but they were the only thing I saw for 6 months. And I was like, okay, that was my breaking point, and I knew I had to. It's something like cracked in me, and was like, okay, I can't live like this. I have to do something about it, and I don't want this anymore. Because before I was like, I can't do anything else but stay here because that is my safety zone and my safe place. But suddenly it turned, and it was like my safe place was like also like turning against me. And I was like, okay, now it has to change. And yeah, then my healing journey started from there. But it was also long and messy.
Yeah. And I feel like it's the way I explained it once to a friend was this analogy of like, it feels like you're sinking and you're sinking into the bottom of a swimming pool. And like when you get to that point where you can't breathe anymore, like when you find the bottom of the pool, you can then like, you can push against it and you can propel yourself up.
Yeah.
But in a way, like we've all got to find that point where we hit our own rock bottom, and no one can really like, that's an internal thing. Like no one can do that for you. No one can drag you out of that. You've got to actually get to the point where you're like, I'm not doing this anymore. And then you just like, and then you've got to swim like crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's I think you and I both know, like it's because we've been there that we're like, okay, well, we're not in this alone. And you know, we found people to support us. And I think we're all in this together. We all figure out these own little bits and pieces of magic that helped us along the way. And then we kind of like, we pass them around and we're like, take a bit of this and take a bit of that and see what works for you. Like,
yeah, exactly.
You know,
But
I
it
think
is like you said, you can't, someone else cannot drag you out of it. And I think as coaches, it's not our job also to drag someone out of that dark place, but we can give the tools and advice to drag someone, or they have to drag themselves out of that place, but we can be the bridge to go from where they are to where they want to be.
Yeah, and that kind of like you give them the tools and it's like, okay, well, when you hit rock bottom, you've got a toolkit.
Yeah, this is what you
Off
can
you go,
do
good
when you're
luck.
there. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And if it's not working out for you, I'm here. I can help you, guide you, but you still have to do it yourself.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I
And
think
what
in a
is
way, like that's an incredibly empowering process to
mhm,
tell people, like, I believe in you, like you can do this.
yeah,
Like, I'm not going to hold your hand because you are actually powerful enough to do it yourself. I'm going to be right
exactly.
here,
Yeah,
but I'm not going to do it for you because you can.
yeah, exactly. And what was the most surprising thing that you learned about yourself in your healing process?
That for me, it was very much that it is completely safe to be vulnerable. I
Mhm,
think that was my greatest fear is I grew up believing that being strong meant that you didn't show any emotion or that
mhm,
you didn't feel any emotion.
mhm,
And so I shut down all of those aspects of myself that were sensitive. And then
mhm,
through my healing journey, I realized that my sensitivity and my emotions and my intuition were my greatest guides and my greatest gifts.
mhm,
And that in order to access everything that I had, like everything that was inside of me, the only way I could access that was to be willing to feel everything.
mhm,
And that was well, okay, so I realized that, and then I had to kind of like really lean into it over a long
mhm.
period of time. It's not something that was like, oh, okay, vulnerability is fine, boom, let's be
Yeah,
vulnerable. It was very much this like, okay,
yeah,
let's get a little bit more vulnerable, and let's get a little bit more and more and more, and surrender and surrender and surrender.
yeah, yeah.
So yeah, I think it's like this ongoing, like we just go deeper and deeper. And but
Mhm,
it was, yeah, my greatest lesson was that being soft is a huge strength.
mhm. It's funny that you say that because actually my next question was, what do you think your greatest gift is? But you have already answered it. No, but and what is your favorite way of like grounding, doing self-care, and to keep yourself energetically healthy?
Oh, I've got so many different things. Like I'm, I guess I'm lucky in a way that my energy is naturally really, really grounded.
Mhm,
Um, so I'm not in that situation where a lot of people that I know are they're very floaty and they kind of
mhm,
escape from their body.
mhm,
To me, I've always been grounded, but um, I need to consistently come back to my core,
mhm,
because as a channel and as an intuitive, I can perceive a lot of things and I can see what other people don't see.
mhm.
And I often feel like everybody sees the world that way. And sometimes I get mind blown that I'm like, you don't know that about yourself because it's so like,
It's so obvious to me.
but you have red hair. And they're like, what? Like, but you have red hair. Like, can't
Yeah.
you? Like, what? But sometimes for me, it's like just coming back into myself and coming back to my core and just um, being okay with everything just as it is and not having to save people and not having to change things and just being really, really present and accepting is always the practice that I come back to, and that just helps me kind of just settle back in and not be so like, I think as healers and as coaches, we
Mhm,
want to help everybody. And it's
mhm,
just like, I need to come back and just go like, it's not my job. It's my job to be me and to be
mhm,
here so that when they're ready, they can come and find me, and
mhm,
not like constantly reach out and.
mhm.
So that's my practice of self-care, is like, bring it back, just be here.
Yeah. And I love the quote on your website that says, "My truest heart's desire is to change the world we live in, but I can't do this alone."
Yeah.
I love that, but it's also so very true because, of course, you cannot do this on your own. What
Yeah.
is your what would your ideal like community be like?
Well, what I found, and the reason I came to that truest heart's desire, is when I was in my last business, my creative business, when I got to a point where I was like, well, what's my vision for this business, and what do I see happening in the future? And I was working with a coach at the time, like a business coach. And I remember feeling like, even though I was creative, I had no vision for that business. Like it was completely blank. And so I tuned in and I asked myself, what do I really, 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 really want more than anything else? And I just heard simply change the world. And I remember feeling this massive rush of fear rush through my body. And I was thinking, but who am I to do that? I can't do that. Like, but at least I knew I had my answer of what I really, really wanted. And then I realized, well, what if I can help people figure out what they really want and what's in the way of them doing that? What if I can help every individual that I get to work with to get out of their own way so that they can fully show up in exactly who they are and do exactly what they're meant to do with confidence, with ease, and trusting themselves and having all the resources to do that. And I was like, well, there you go. That's what I'm going to do.
That's it.
And that's what I have the gifts to do, is to help people figure out who they are, what's standing in their way, see the things that they can't see, and just bust through all of those blocks and just be who they were always meant to be. And in a way, I'm like, well, we're all here together. We're meant to support each other in all kinds of different ways so that we can change this world together. And that in a way was kind of like, well, it's not my sole responsibility to be Wonder Woman and change the world. It's just my responsibility to be me and to do everything that I can to help the people who come to me and are like, hey, I want to go and do this. And I'm like, cool, okay, well, what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
And let's do that. And so yeah, that's really, really fun to be able to do.
Yeah, definitely. Well, my last question is also always the same one, and that is, when are you at your happiest?
Please don't hold my husband or my kids, but when I'm all alone. Yeah, there's something, I think when we're really, really sensitive and we feel so much, and we feel like this sense of like wanting to do so much and wanting to hold everybody and make everything better, being able to be really present and be completely alone and just be with nature, to me feels like I'm just me with my own soul, and there's no responsibility, there's nothing else to hold, there's no pressure. That's where I don't actually have that very often, because often when I'm out in nature, I'm sitting there with an intention to channel and to like grow and to do all these different things. So when I'm able to allow myself that gift of complete presence and lack of responsibility, that's when I'm really connected to all things and everything's like really flowy and beautiful. But it's often like when I'm completely alone and I've got nothing else to do, which doesn't happen all that often, but when it does, it's beautiful. So I enjoy it so much more.
Well, thank you so much for today, Cha. It was really an honor to talk to you.
Thank you so much. I loved your questions and your beautiful way of just really hearing and witnessing me and my questions, my answers, my experience. So thank you for everything that you do as well.
Thank you so much.